This is Technically Legal, a podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. I'm Chad Main, the founder of legal services company Percipient, and on today's show, I'm talking to Tom Dunlop. He's the founder and CEO of contract lifecycle management and automation app, Summize. Tom Dunlop was a nationally ranked badminton player in Great Britain, and he had his sights set on the Olympics. But when an injury forced him to retire from professional sports, he found himself drawn to the world of law and technology. As we will hear, Tom's journey to becoming a legal tech founder was anything but straightforward. He faced rejection early on when law firms refused to give him a training contract because they didn't think he had enough commercial experience. But Tom didn't let that stop him. He saw an opportunity not only to get that commercial experience, but to disrupt the legal industry with technology. And he set out to build a lawyer comparison site that would make legal services more accessible and efficient. After building the app, Tom ultimately became a lawyer and ended up working as in-house counsel for a good chunk of his career. But even so, he could never shake his entrepreneurial spirit, and he decided to found another legal tech company. That company is Summize. Summize is an AI-powered contract lifecycle management and automation platform that helps businesses streamline their contract workflows. The app's unique approach focuses on embedding its technology into the tools people already use, like Slack, Microsoft Teams, and Outlook. So this makes it easier for businesses to adopt and use. Today on the show, Tom Dunlop talks about the challenges and triumphs of building a legal tech company, the importance of meeting users where they are, and the future of AI in the legal industry.
I kind of divide my life into different acts. I think my first act was very much to do with being an athlete. So I think I was, going to Great Britain badminton player for a number of years, going on the Olympic route. That was my life. In some ways, law or tech or anything like that wasn't really necessarily a huge part of my life at that stage. But then when I left Great Britain, and that was at the time I'd done my law degree, I kind of focused on the legal industry. And what I found was that I got almost like criticism for not having commercial experience because I was a professional athlete. So I used to get paid to be an athlete.
Right.
So what I kind of decided at that point was like, well, I'm not doing necessarily playing for Great Britain anymore. So how can I show you that I can be commercial? And there was just this kind of moment where I think I was inspired by a guy that I knew that was a kind of sort of family relation that used to always come up with ideas, crazy ideas, and about anything. And I kind of got a bit of a bug from him to start thinking creatively about a business idea. This is at the time of comparison sites where I guess, it's particularly in the UK, actually, they really went big on car insurance, home insurance, that kind of stuff. And I guess I could see a route where legal services were becoming a bit more commoditized. People were being a bit more transparent about the pricing. And actually, the traditional way of finding a solicitor was probably asking a family friend, do you know anyone who's a solicitor? And that was the way to refer it. You had no idea of quality and price. So the whole concept was really, can legal services be a bit more commoditized based on quality and price? And can you do that at scale? And that was really the initial idea. But the catalyst for doing it was no one would give me a training contract to actually train me as a lawyer because they didn't think I was commercial enough. So I was kind of like, right, well, I'll show you and start my own business.
I see. And then, so from that, does that inspire you to get into the law yourself, or is that something always in the back of your mind, even when you were an athlete?
Yeah, I think I enjoyed doing law at, I guess in the UK we call them the A levels, but I guess prior to going to university, I enjoyed doing the course. I think it was good problem solving. The ironic thing about being an athlete was it was so physically demanding, but obviously not really mentally demanding. I think law gave me an outlet to be a good problem solver and really think about things in a different way. So I quite liked the balance of almost simultaneously doing a law degree whilst also playing for Great Britain. It was kind of, I guess I had the physical element, but also the mental element by doing a law degree.
But even as an athlete, isn't there a mental element? Just you got to be tough, like in the law, like have thick skin and stuff. But as an athlete, you do too, because you can't get too down on your bad days. You can't get too up on your good days. And then in the moment, you got to be strong to make sure you're competing at your highest level, right?
There's so many attributes of an athlete to what I describe as a founder. But I guess what I didn't necessarily have was which is more that grit, that determination, that almost like unwavering confidence in yourself as an individual that you will overcome any challenge that you come up against. However, I guess it wasn't necessarily applying your mind to complex mental tasks. It wasn't necessarily really having to think through complex problems and come up with answers. And I think that I quite liked that aspect of law where you'd be given a set of facts and you have to go away and research and come up with some probing questions to really problem solve. So I think it was more that aspect that I enjoyed. And then I kind of decided at the end when I moved away from Great Britain that I would do my legal practice course, which was essentially the precursor to going into practice, which is at exactly the same time I was doing this solicitor comparison site. So they were kind of, I guess, running in parallel. I obviously was wondering, I actually, before I became a lawyer, again, my life has taken a number of different turns. I did sports management and sports agency for a while, so represented footballers and things like that.
There's legal involved there for sure.
Exactly, yeah. Then converted straight to law, essentially.
So you get your degree, you get into legal practice. I think you worked for a firm for a while, but then ultimately it seems like most of your career was spent as an in-house lawyer. Is that right?
Yeah, so I pretty quickly after qualification realized that I preferred to be a bit more holistic in how I thought of things, and I actually cared about the business impact of the legal advice. So I very quickly moved in-house, and pretty much the majority of my career spent with tech businesses as their in-house lawyer kind of GC.
So then at some point though, you get the bug to be a founder. How's that happen? And not only how does that happen, how does it end up being Summize, a contract app?
The way I perceive it, I think I did something a while ago where I said there's no such thing as an entrepreneur. But what I really mean by that was moving to a tech business and being a lawyer. I think that I caught the bug of developing an entrepreneurial mindset, which really was more about, everyone I worked with was always thinking about how they could do things better. The whole company was centered around growth and, we're going to be doubling in size next year. So we need to think about how we can be more efficient and scalable. And I think that I caught the bug of actually trying to solve my day-to-day problems in a better way, not necessarily by a tech or starting a business, but just trying to get a better mindset of being, I guess, kind of developing that entrepreneurial problem-solving mindset. So I guess I started to do that, and you start then applying it to all parts of your life. So I have the black book of ideas. I kind of really caught the bug, and you're obviously inspired by the founders of these businesses as well. And then I guess the catalyst really in terms of the contract specific, which is interesting because all of my ideas were very much anything to do with my day job. I almost felt was boring, or I almost felt was probably not going to be received well by everyone else. So you almost ignore the problems that you actually face and you're an expert in deliberately. Like a lot of people do this. And I remember it's actually a friend at the time. I was kind of going through a due diligence process, reviewing hundreds of contracts at the time, trying to pull out the same information, really manual, took me months. And I went to my co-founder, who wasn't then, but now, Dave, and I just basically said to him, like, it's so much easier if I could just summarize this contract instantly. I know what I'm looking for. Why can't I just summarize it? And it was kind of he kind of looked up to me and said, well, you can. I mean, or like we started to talk around ideas about how we could maybe do that. So that was the first time that I guess in my head, I was like, oh, wow.
What year was this? I mean, AI did exist, obviously existed for a while,
Yeah.
but not as we know it in 2024. So what year is this?
This was more like 2018.
What was the idea you guys had to summarize it at that point in time with the tech available? What'd you come up with?
Yeah, so at the time, I guess the biggest thing I wanted to find was, I guess, first stage was finding relevance in contracts. So a lot of that was driven by pattern recognition. It was driven by almost like heat mapping. It was, I guess, a lot of data points that would indicate how relevant something is, a paragraph, a sentence, to a particular clause. And that was really the whole start of Summize. The actual output was the hardest thing to solve for us at the time because we'd find, a 100-page MSA, completely unstructured text. We'd be kind of curating that data, finding all this really good information, saying, right, here's the 5-6 most relevant things for a contract. We actually struggled to then put a really, really useful natural language summary as the output. And then obviously fast forward and Gen AI comes on the scene, and very much that's what kind of, there was the cherry on the cake really for us that allowed us to do, some really powerful summaries on top of it. So we used elements of AI back then, which was more to do with the pattern recognition, entity extraction, a number of different AI models, but a lot of it actually was algorithm based on our side that we developed based on relevance. And that's kind of how we got started in terms of the summarization.
We need to do more with less. That is the key takeaway nowadays from almost every survey of in-house counsel. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you actually could do more for less? By combining legal expertise and technology, Percipient enables legal teams to get more work done for less. Buried in contracts and sales is frustrated with turnaround time? We can help with that. Did you just get hit with a subpoena and reviewing 100,000 documents and files will tax your resources or cost you a small fortune in billable hours? We can help there too. Our team of legal professionals leverage tech and project management principles with the right amount of human oversight to deliver precise, efficient, and cost-effective legal solutions. Whether it's legal operations and contract management support, subpoena compliance, or document review. Percipient is your partner in really doing more for less. Percipient, legal services powered by technology.
So before we go back to what's under the hood and how it works, explain what Summize is. One of the coolest aspects of the differentiator is that the starting point for the users, and it's usually the business people, is that it's embedded in tools that people are already using at the company. So you meet me in the elevator. Here, give me your elevator pitch. What is Summize vis-a-vis another contract app?
I'll break it into three different kind of ways that we provide efficiencies. The first one is looking at the business. And I like to think of this about kind of reducing the volume that gets into legal. So a big part of our products actually is about allowing the business to be a lot more self-sufficient. They can create contracts or submit contracts for review, but using the tools that they already use. So we have Teams chatbots, we have a Slack bot, we integrate with Outlook, we integrate with Gmail, Salesforce, HubSpot. The beauty of that is that the business user, the salesperson, the marketing person, never has to actually go to summize.com. They can create contracts without legal involvement, and they can submit and get them triaged without actually going to a different platform. So that's first use case, is kind of reducing the volume that gets into legal and making the business more self-sufficient. The second then is, well, what actually gets into legal? How can we make legal more efficient? And we do that through a word add-in primarily because most lawyers want to stay in Microsoft Word and believe it's a good word processor, a word editor. So we provide a bunch of tools to make lawyers more efficient for the stuff that actually gets in through the legal front door. That can be summarization, playbook access, an AI assistant. We've got AI redlining that we've released, and also just general workflow and tasks and conversations to be accessible via Word. So that's that second point, really. We make legal a lot more efficient in contracts that come through, that we can provide a toolkit to make them more efficient, whatever type of review that it might be. And then the final stage is really our first use case, which is then when it gets to post-signature, we can summarize contracts instantly. But the beauty of that is we provide a really natural language, kind of detail-rich summary of a contract that a business user could look at and completely understand out the box. Again, without having that almost like legal translator sat there explaining what a contract might be saying.
Where does business find that? Where does business find that summary? Because you said the business person is using Slack, Teams, whatever. They're asking their questions, they're creating their contracts. They don't have to go to Summize.com. It goes to legal, which they do go to Summize.com. They access the app there. But then after the fact, you got this summary. The business person, Salesforce, whatever it is, want to see. Where do they go to see the summary and what happened?
So they could, if they want to, go to summize.com and view a very much traditional repository view. We can export it to Excel and they can see it there, but they can also ask questions of those within those kind of apps as well. So the Slack,
Within the
Teams,
bot.
yeah,
They can go within the bot.
Exactly, yeah. So it's a pretty holistic kind of. They can submit, they can create, they can check updates, and they can also ask contracts or access contracts via those legal front doors.
First step is I'm just say I'm a salesperson. I've got a contract. Maybe it's whatever. I create the contract, goes through the machinations, it gets signed. So then I can go back to the bot where I started the whole thing and say, hey, what date was this signed? And it's going to tell me.
Yeah, exactly that.
Can I also ask it questions like, what jurisdiction was the choice of law clause in it? Will it answer that too?
So what we're very good at is extracting, summarizing content. We've got a really data-rich repository. And I think that the beauty, again, of Gen AI that you referenced is that now we can overlay Gen AI to be able to, do multi-threaded questions. So you could say, out of my whatever type of contracts, or let's say, I have all my contracts with a particular entity with Google, when do they renew and what notice period would I have to provide? And if I don't, does it auto-renew? It's a pretty, I guess, multi-threaded question you may ask. But because we've extracted all that information, we can then provide that in an answer back and answer all those different questions in a very natural language response.
So I want to go back to this Gen AI piece and the AI piece back when you're building it. So you start in 2018, you're doing the heat maps, using the tech as it existed at the time. So when 2020, 2021 rolls around, Gen AI becomes available. Do you think, man, all this work we've done is for naught? Or do you think, this is excellent, we can plug it in? And did it take a reworking? Like, what happened when AI was rolled out?
I think it's all those emotions, if I'm honest. I think you do naturally go through the phase of, at a time, I guess it was a USP for us that we could summarize contracts. I mean, I guess as we've gone on, we've realized the importance of being embedded in people's tools is actually the real USP that we have. But I think that the summarization piece, what we're still finding is if you've got really unstructured data that's quite a long document, which most contracts are, AI still struggles to give a good output. It looks impressive at first glance, but when you want something quite specific out of a contract that's relevant to a particular company, like for example, do we have restrictions on IP that allow us to use our logo because we're a company that values our brand? AI on its own is not going to flag that necessarily as being a huge risk because it doesn't necessarily recognize that for that brand it's a big risk. So we believe that there's still a huge requirement for almost this curation of the data, which is what we do as step one. And then we overlay that Gen AI on the top. So for us, it was a massive help. And it's been a huge, almost like hole that we had, which was how can we now create this really powerful natural language summary from this great data that we've managed to, I guess, organize and extract from this contract. So it's still great, but do I see a world where Gen AI starts to do more of that complex reasoning at the start? Probably, and I think that that's what we're very much alive to. But as I say, a lot of our stuff now is actually linking together. We call it a digital thread, but linking together the full experience of touch points with contracts through all these different tools, with a load of the smarts kind of built in, like the summarization element. So I think it's becoming less and less important for us as a USP. Similarly, at the same time as the more that Gen AI can do.
Mechanically, how's that work? You talked about curating the data that's relevant to that company, and your example was use of IP. You said AI may not know that it's important to this type of organization. How is Summize doing that? So the request comes in to look at a contract, create a contract, whatever. Legal goes in and does that, gets it signed. At what point is Summize grabbing that information from the contract and curating that information?
It's the moment it comes back in. So we very much split our products into request, pre-signature, repository, post-signature. So it can get back into us via any e-signature tool, by uploading via Outlook, whatever it might be. But if you file it away in the repository, we actually have quite a complex process when you upload where there's loads of things that happen. But when we ingest the document, we go through a series of, I guess, workflows and processes. And at the end of that, we provide an automated summary at that point. To do that, we do have, I guess, different ways that the customer can get up and running. It might be we just take their template, their precedent template, and create a bunch of almost like rules that are developed from that, which can feed the engine which finds relevance. They can go into a load more depth. We've got, I guess, a more in-depth settings area where you can really kind of dictate the prompts and you can actually start to ask the questions that you want to get asked as well. And you can even highlight certain sections and give us that information, more of the traditional, what you'd argue is training the data. We don't really use that part very much anymore, but that is another way of doing it as well. So I think for us, it's quite low touch to actually get going and finding the relevance because of I guess once we've got a contract and we've got some reference point, our engine in the back is pretty sophisticated in looking at loads of different data points that find relevance. And then once we've kind of sectioned them, we can then pass to the LLM.
But for users to access that functionality, they need to use your repository piece in Summize. So like, let's say they're, historically they've kept their data in Google Drive or the Microsoft equivalent, which I think generally is where a lot of people keep the stuff. You can't get to it there. Or can you? Or is there some way you can work in tandem?
We do have integrations with Google Drive and SharePoint. We typically provide it more one way, as in we want Summize to be the core repository. And that the reason for that is obviously that we extract all this data and we want people to be querying the data from Summize rather than through G Drive or SharePoint. They don't have the functionality. But we can push documents that we store in Summize into a G Drive folder almost as a backup or a SharePoint folder. So it's just the data that we're getting out of the contract, the stuff that you actually want to get out of the contract, that's what you want to keep in Summize and then make accessible. And that's what we want to be as I guess the system of record, or the one source of truth.
I saw that you also integrate with DocuSign, right?
Yeah.
Among I'm sure other signature tools too. But so let's just use that as an example. So if someone then gets the document executed via DocuSign, both parties sign, is the integration such where it comes back into Summize? How do we get it into Summize so it can do the curation as you describe it?
I guess we've got two different ways. One is a lot more of an automated route. So we do have a number of customers that, let's say in Slack, they create an NDA and they're comfortable. They want to send that straight to DocuSign. So we can set it up where you answer a few questions. It goes automatically into DocuSign. The moment it's signed by both parties, it goes back into Summize into a dedicated folder. We summarize it and it's done, all automated. The other is that you have gone through a negotiation process and then we have a sign button within the Summize, I guess, matter management area, if you will. And when you press that, it will then push it into DocuSign, the conventional route. And then from there, again, when it comes back in, we summarize it. So you can do it a bit more, I say manually, we integrate into DocuSign to the point where you press a button, or you can just have the entire thing automated, depending on how the customer wants to work.
Which is what you want to do, right? In the back end. So the minute it's signed by everybody, it just goes straight
Exactly.
into Summize.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there's a lot of features, and the coolest part, most important part to emphasize here is that you're meeting people where they work, right? If it's fitting into the tools they're already using, and I think in legal tech, that's a lot of times overlooked because you got to get another tool, whatever. And that's just not how people work. And I think that's really cool. But you've got a lot of features now. But what's on the roadmap? Like, what's the next most pressing thing you're trying to roll out?
I'd probably break into 3 different areas. I think everyone is going to continually develop the complexity of their AI models. I think there's a lot of noise about agentic AI, but really the way I perceive that is just the complexity of tasks rather than single task completion is just getting more sophisticated with AI usage. So that is something that we're obviously focusing on over the next 12 months. And that's throughout the entire product. So that's not necessarily a specific functionality or feature that I'm going to talk about, but more of a development in terms of what people are comfortable AI handling autonomously and the level of tasks to get more complex. I think we are also continuing to improve the native integrations. You mentioned before that legal still have to go to Summize.com. And, a big part of what the roadmap is for the next few months is actually we don't believe legal do need to go to Summize.com either, with the way that we can control the flow through Outlook and Word, and you can access requests and you can access all of the tasks, the conversations all from these tools. And we want to make that the ability where typically if you're got an email, you open it in Word straight away and then you want to send it again, that we don't miss the opportunity to be part of that flow because you need to divert away from that. So that's another element that we are working on as well. And then the last one probably is more around a bit further out, but I think there's a lot of interesting concepts on our side to do with content and validation of good content. For example, whether it be templates, whether it be advice, and validated advice, maybe from more of the law firm community than in-house, but that can be a bit more of a training guide or more of a validated content that could feed into the AI as well. So I think they're the 3 probably key areas.
Let's talk about 2 first.
Yeah.
How do you envision this, or how are you working on it where they don't have to go to Summize.com to do this? So here's the scenario. Business person either creates a contract or has a request for a contract. It gets to legal. Legal's got to do their magic. And this is all either done in, you mentioned Word, of course, where they're also going to get, or Outlook or whatever. How's this going to work then? How does legal avoid going to Summize to get the work done in the contract that the business person has asked?
I guess the entry point for the lawyer is that, even if they've submitted it via a legal front door, let's say the business user did a Slack request, we can notify them in Slack, or we could do it in Outlook. So either one works, but essentially what you'll get is that, you get the document through and you'll get the request information that came through with it. If you just open that document into the desktop version of Word, as if you probably would do anyway from Outlook, we have a Microsoft Word add-in that sits there, and we can also track that document we essentially put code in there, so we can open up our Word add-in and we can tag it to a request. So we can actually render anything to do with that request in Microsoft Word. So if there's tasks or conversations or any workflow that needs to happen, we're essentially giving you the power of almost like a full-blown CLM, but we're giving you a snapshot for that particular request in Microsoft Word, as well as doing all of the review and the summaries and the AI redlining all happens there. You can check it into Summize from Word, and then you just go back into Outlook, send that document. We've already tagged that document, so we're now in that document, if that makes sense. Goes to the side, comes back again, open it up again. We automatically know it's relevant to that request, and you just continue in Word, desktop version of Word, and just working through our add-in. You can actually send it for signature via Word as well, or Outlook. So it's only, I guess, more if you wanted to understand holistically on analytics or across all of your matters and you want that in one screen, that you may go to Summize.com. But a lot of the AI advancements we're doing is actually you can ask through the chatbots, where's this up to? Where's that up to? How many of my requests have this characteristic? And we can answer them within Slack and Teams and Outlook as well. So I do envisage a world where you probably don't need to go to Summize.com actually to get any of the power of the solution.
That's the front end stuff, right? Because the back end stuff, you still probably always need to go to Summize to organize it, to grab it, to see, do that high end analysis, right?
Yeah, and I think the background processes, the data storage, being that system of record essentially, and categorizing the data. I think it's important that we have quality data and it's structured in the right way is obviously all within Summize. I think it's just more about, as you described, where does the user interact with Summize, the Summize intelligence at the point they need to when they're dealing with a contract. I think the biggest friction point with CLMs and a lot of legal tech is they've got a certain process, they've got a document, they've got whatever it might be, and then you're taking them away from that to go and do another action that is in a particular .com and log in and get used to the UI, and then you've got to go back to the document again, and it's actually not necessarily creating efficiency. It's a diversion from what they want to do. The simplest
Right.
thing is to keep it Outlook, Word, and then that's it.
So number one you mentioned was agentic AI or using agents, but can't you see a time in the future, probably not next year, maybe 5 years, who knows what it is, but where the person goes into Slack, probably doesn't even type it, probably just says in a microphone, hey, I need an NDA for company X. Here's the email address. Here's the signer's name, and boom, it's done, right? Isn't that going to happen at some point?
Yes, I think you can see the gradual move towards that. And I think the reason that we integrate with very chat based tools is because you can probably see the world going probably more voice driven, as you just described. But also, it's chat and voice is the way that the future is of probably most applications. Most of even as a desktop, most people access work through Teams or they may do it through Slack. And I think a lot of their, I guess, future is to try and keep people in those tools for as long as possible and not get them to divert away from Teams or Slack. So we're almost going with that direction and assuming that that's the future of work, and we want to be in that environment. So yeah, could I see a world where someone essentially does a voice note and says, create an NDA that has these properties, and it then goes away and it might ask you some more questions, but ultimately it's an autonomous process. Like very much so, yeah.
Interesting. Tom, this is all really cool. I appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming on the show. If people want to learn more about Summize, get a hold of you, where do you want to send them?
Definitely summize.com, and there's a load of information there. There's some demo videos, sign up for demo, but you can see a lot of stuff on there with content. Me personally and the company as well, LinkedIn, probably the most active on there. So they're probably the two places.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.